I'm going to introduce to you Attorney General Phil Weiser. Thanks for being here.
Well, can we first start by thanking Heidi, Jamie, Jack, and the whole team for extraordinary work, really. Putting an event like this together takes a lot of work and planning. This was a remarkable team effort. Today, day 2 of this conference will be open to media and the public. We are in the midst of what really is path-marking work in Colorado. The opioid crisis has been 25 years in the making. We have seen, and so many have lived, the painful trauma, the losses, because of an addiction crisis that has gripped our nation, and we're now in what many have called the third wave of that crisis, and the most severe. It started with prescription pills that were pushed out to so many people, and as late as 6 or 7 years ago, when I broke my ribs, I was given a whole bunch of prescription pills to take home. That was the ordinary experience. Many people who had back pain or other illnesses became addicted. The second wave is when drug cartels realized we have a market, and they pushed out heroin. And I heard from many people who said the pills were harder to get or more expensive, but heroin was easier, and so I made the change. In Colorado Springs, we had a forum of the leadership there, and someone showed up and said, I took today off work. I'm here with my son. I lost my wife to opioid addiction. She started on pills. She moved to heroin. She had a master's degree. She ended up homeless, and she overdosed. And then he added, we lost another son too. And he said, and I've heard this from many people, we as Colorado must seize this moment and address this crisis. Unfortunately, we're now facing an even deadlier wave, fentanyl. And these counterfeit pills, 2 out of 5 of them, for someone who's not a user with a lot of tolerance, can be killed, which is why we hear the phrase coming from the Drug Enforcement Administration, 1 pill can kill. So we have a lot of work to do on education and awareness, on providing drug treatment for so many who don't have access to it and need it, and recovery services to help people live with what will remain a challenge for everyone who struggles with addiction. I want to talk about the work we're doing here and put a little context. Not sure what that was.
Over the last decade.
How do I go back? Here we go. All right, this is the context of getting this whole effort launched. Let's see if it works. Okay. Okay, so let's try this now.
Over the last decade here in Colorado, nearly 5,000 Coloradans died from prescription opioid overdose. As Colorado Attorney General, I'm committed to addressing this opioid crisis. That's why we brought litigation against irresponsible actors in the pharmaceutical industry who hurt people by pushing out dangerous drugs.
I was prescribed 360 pills in a month period after I had gallbladder surgery. I was hooked. The doctors had cut me off, and I had gone to the streets to start buying pills. I lost my apartment, I lost my home, I lost my job. So I was literally sleeping on the train tracks at the Fort Collins Rescue Mission. I had to get some clean time in me so that I can get into treatment. I went to go check myself into that treatment center, and I had like 27 days clean off of heroin at the time. And they turned me away.
Having done this for the last 10 years, it is so apparent to me that our system, while it is well intended, and there are some parts of it that are really well built, it isn't complete. We need greater access to treatment. There is no harder place to be than in a setting where the level of care that your patient needs is simply not available. We've had people die on our waiting lists.
There's a lot of shame and guilt, right? So a lot of people don't want to come out and talk about their story. My experience has been is you either have to have a lot of money to get into treatment or go cop up a bunch of felonies, and the justice system will put you in a treatment bed. And that's not okay.
Now, these companies are being held to account, with $400 million coming to Colorado as long as we can get local governments on board. Please join us and stand together, signing this Memorandum of Understanding to give us twice the money that we'd otherwise get. It's going to give us an opportunity to do something critical, addressing opioid use disorder by providing more drug treatment, more drug recovery programs, and better education and prevention efforts.
What I can tell you now, after 40 years of law enforcement, is that if arrest, stigmatization, and incarceration worked with drug users, we wouldn't be here today. I'm excited at the prospect of actually seeing this cohesive effort come together and maybe make a real dent in this, because the problem is getting worse and worse and worse, and we've got to find a way to get it under control. When we do this together, we can save lives.
If everyone signs on to the agreement, there's no question that we can improve access to care and improve the quality of care that people are receiving.
Montrose County is signing on because we believe this is the right thing to do for our communities, and we're not going to waste time. We're going to get it done as soon as possible, but we're signing on because we believe in it.
Pueblo County is going to sign this agreement because we have waited long enough. We have seen enough suffering in our communities. We see these opioid settlement funds as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to put dollars back into the areas of our community that have been victimized by the opioid epidemic.
This settlement and the agreement are going to give us powerful tools to start regaining ground, because the human cost of this fight is real and it has been heartbreaking.
We've got a lot of work to do to address this crisis. Our office is committed to that important work, but we need your help. Let's sign this agreement now so we can begin the process of healing our state and communities and give people who need help the support they deserve.
I have a voice today. I get to help others in their recovery journey and tell them my story. People recover. People can be contributing members to society. Moms can be moms again. Dads can be dads again. People can be an effective part of the community again.
Let's do this together. To find out more, please go to coag.gov/opioids.
So stage one was getting local governments on board. Of every state in the nation, Colorado was the third to get all its local governments on board. And I want to tell you, Connecticut and Delaware were 1 and 2, and they don't really count because they don't have a lot of local governments. So we're really number one as I think about it. I want to acknowledge Tammy and Ray Gottsagen here, who came to one of the meetings early on my time as chair of the Substance Abuse Trend and Response Task Force. I'll give a shout out to Jose Escabel, who's here, and Rob Valek, who've been part of the ecosystem building up a community-wide effort for these conversations. And Tammy talked about her son, Braden, who died of fentanyl poisoning because there wasn't enough awareness and there isn't enough destigmatization about conversations. The more this is in the dark, the more people are at risk of dying. And we need a multi-pronged response of the type we're talking about. And what I want to underscore is we're doing this together. We're doing this transparently. Today I'm going to give you a preview of what is going to be the latest edition on this coag.gov opioids. It's not only about this framework, it's about how the money is being spent. What we'll be able to show everybody, and this is really important because the aspiration is the regions will learn from one another. Every region will be watching every other region asking, that's interesting, you're spending the money this way, I'm spending it that way. And so we can reconvene, learning from one another, and as Commissioner Lori Lasky was talking about from the San Luis Valley, they're going to do their best to evaluate what worked and what didn't work. I will guarantee you some regions will do some things that don't work. That's important because we need an all-hands-on-deck response, and it's not as if people have cracked the code on education and awareness efforts. And there are different types of drug treatment and recovery efforts, and different types of harm reduction and how to work within the justice system. And so here's an example where you look at a region and you say, Mesa County, here's how much money you're getting. And this is the allocation for the given period. Then you can see over 18 years. And then if you go to the next slide, you can go even more and look at Grand Junction. And one of the challenges that we are aware of is local governments are going to sometimes say, we'll spend the money ourselves, and they're going to have reporting responsibilities. A lot of local governments have said, you know, we think we'll get more bang for the buck putting the money in the region. And that's going to be a choice every local government makes, and they can reconsider that choice if they start saying we'll spend it on our own. They're like, you know what, it takes us more effort to report on how we're spending it than it's worth having it. We're going to go ahead and put it in the region. What we've talked about before is these 4 buckets. So obviously the regional share is the big kahuna. That's where most of the money's going, 6% of the total money. The local share, 20%, which in many cases that money will get put into the region. There are then these 2 other buckets. One is the infrastructure share, and this is meant to provide support for those hard-hit regions that don't already have established infrastructure. If you are the city and county of Denver, for example, you have considerable infrastructure already built up. But if you are in the Southwest region or the San Luis Valley region or the Southeast region, you are building infrastructure, in some cases physical infrastructure, new facilities, in other cases virtual infrastructure, how you collect data and make your decisions to address the crisis. So that's 10% will be the infrastructure share. And then finally, at the state level, we will be looking at how we use the final 10%, and we have a special opioid crisis recovery funds advisory committee to help us as we make those decisions. In terms of understanding the players, we work together, and it was a lot of conversation with CCI, with CML and others, to create this concept of an abatement council, which you can learn more about on our website. This abatement council has 14 members, 7 local, 7 by the state. I am an ex officio member. I hope never to have to cast a ballot because I only do so in the case of a tie. And our goal is to operate as much as possible by consensus. The idea of the abatement council is providing some oversight. So the local regions are each going to do plans that they're going to submit in a month or so. Once those plans are approved, and once the underlying infrastructure of a memorandum of understanding and having the officers for each region is set up, then the money will go to each of the regions. And the way it was set up is we give the money first, and then over time we'll start asking, did you spend the money? And are there concerns you didn't spend it properly? This money is not to pave roads. It's not to fund Little Leagues. This money is to address the opioid crisis. If there are cases where the money is not spent properly or not spent at all, the abatement council is there to oversee what's happening. I also mentioned this opioid crisis advisory committee. That's to help the state on its 10%, and we've also given people access to other resources. We are in this for the long game, to learn from one another. We believe Colorado can be a leader nationally. We believe this moment can be a spark of hope that we've long waited for, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. There is so much work to do. The critical element for all of us is how we do this work together. And I think I've got a little time for questions before we get started with today's program. And I know we've got a packed one, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that folks may have at this time. There's one over here, yes. And please introduce yourself first.
I'm Allison Gottsman. I work with the Practice Innovation Program at the CU School of Medicine. My question is very basic. What's the approval process for the regional plans, and what are you looking for? And if the original plan isn't exactly right, I assume there's an opportunity to revisit.
Thank you for mentioning that. First and foremost, our goal is to be a supporter, facilitator, so the plan is adequate. There is within the Abatement Council support that we've created, so any region who's saying, we're trying to figure out our plan. Can you help us? The answer is always going to be, yes, we can. Yes, we will. Our goal is to get every plan to an adequate state so it can be approved and the money can start flowing. The consequence if someone doesn't submit a plan or can't get one that's adequate and can be approved is they won't get the money as quickly. That's the consequence. But our goal is for that not to happen in any region.
I'm very concerned about the folks that can't get into inpatient rehabs because of their. I'm concerned about people that can't get into inpatient rehabs because of past convictions.
So there's a premise to your question that begs a question that I don't know the answer to. What % of drug treatment out there is restricted such that prior convictions would bar access to that drug treatment? To put it one way, there are, I guess, then 3 separate buckets, if you will. As noted in the video, there are dedicated spots for those who are involved in the criminal justice system. To your question, there are some treatment programs that won't take anybody who's been involved, and then there's programs that accept both. One of the challenges we have is getting our arms around what are all the resources out there, and I know that regions are doing an inventory to get a sense of that. I personally hadn't been aware that that distinction is one that was as clear as obviously it is to you. So I don't know how much that is the case.
Hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to me on the side.
Yeah, let's talk more about that.
Thank you.
All right, time for another question or two?
Hi, I'm Marissa Stoller from the City of Pueblo. I was wondering when you had the 2 different types of funding buckets for the state and for the infrastructure, when we're talking about the regional plan and the money that's going to flow from the regional plan, are those only coming from one of the budgets? And then is there an opportunity to apply for a different bucket for that? Can you explain more about how that works?
I sure can. This is an important distinction. There are 2 buckets that are managed at the state level. They have different purposes and they're managed differently. One is the infrastructure fund, which is managed by the Abatement Council that's been set up. I've referred to that 7 and 7. That money is dedicated to provide support to regions that have less infrastructure, including the one that you're from. And we are going to, within the months ahead, announce how regions can apply for infrastructure fund grants. That announcement will be forthcoming. We'll make sure every region hears about that opportunity. The second bucket, the state share, is where we've given planning grants from to support regions. It's also we've given funding to our tribes from that, and we're working on a teen-focused awareness and prevention program, leveraging our Safe to Tell program that is very much focused on students and the safety of young people. We'll also be considering other uses for the state funding. That money is governed differently because there's an advisory committee set up by statute, and it's up to our department to make the ultimate judgments on how to spend those funds as well.
So the infrastructure funds are what are going to the regions?
That's correct. Infrastructure funds are dedicated to regions. The state share is a broader discretionary funding source to support a range of projects. I do want to underscore something that I know a lot of regions are thinking about, which is this framework has meant to be the spark that will then ignite and allow other activity, including applying for and using other funding sources. We know this money will not be sufficient. We need the regions to be scrappy. We want to help you be creative so you can get funding from other sources to make what can be transformative investments, establishing additional drug treatment capacity where it didn't exist previously.
Good morning, and thank you for all of your leadership around bringing all of this together. I think it's massive and needed, and look forward to working with everyone on it. To follow up from the previous question, we know that we have lots of gaps and needs that we're going to be addressing together, and some of those challenges related to treatment facilities in counties. There's a rural and larger, but sometimes the larger ones don't have adequate treatment. And so what are the plans as it relates to doing an assessment and maybe some dashboards to really put some eyes on what is actually happening in all of the counties, so then we can work together to address that from many aspects?
This is a really wonderful question because it will segue to the next speaker. And I want to start by introducing the next speaker, and then I'll start answering, and then she can come up. So Commissioner Wendy Buxton-Andrade, since taking office, has asked that question. What resources do they have? What needs do we have? What strategies can we use to better address our needs, given that rural regions tend to be strapped? So there's a challenge that you've identified. Rural regions are less densely populated, so you have a challenge to provide resources. And in many cases, our rural regions, the Southeast region being a notable example, are harder hit by this epidemic. So your question is, how do we get, if I understand it correctly, how do we get our arms around what the needs are, what the resources are, and what the opportunities are? And the regions, as I understand it, are working to basically, in their plans, capture just that. What resources do we know we currently have? What needs do we have? What options do we have? How do we prioritize them? And this is an 18-year mission that we're focused on to address the crisis. And then, as I noted very significantly to me, and we're here to help, what other funding sources might we consider going after to accomplish goals? And I know that in both the Southwest region and the San Luis Valley region, there are other opportunities that the groups that have been brought together are now pursuing, in some cases quite in a promising way. And part of what I believe will happen, what I aspire to happen, is these communities of learning across our state will give us some ideas of effective ways to manage better peer recovery, for example. And in Salida, I think Chaffey County, they've developed a quite robust peer recovery network, which might be replicated elsewhere. In other parts of the state, they might be using telemedicine in some ways, or they might be using hub and spoke transportation in some ways. And there are a lot of uncertainties as to what will work best. And we are very sensitive to your point that the challenges in rural regions are different than urban.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify a little bit, and I wholeheartedly believe what you're saying. I'm from El Paso County, and so we're the most populous county in the state. However, we do have pockets of rural and very diverse, and sometimes if you're a larger county, it's not necessarily true that we have lots of treatment resources. So I just wanted to make sure that we have adequate inventory and assessment, that we are adjusting it from a perspective that is, of course, focused on data, but I just wanted to point that out. Sometimes what people might think that happens in large counties, that we have adequate resources, there's still many challenges.
That's a very important point, and I was talking to Peter Padilla, who's the chair of the Adams County region, and he noted Adams County, like El Paso County, has pockets that are more rural and look more like Southeast Colorado in some cases than maybe people might be thinking Adams County, they're thinking about Thornton, for example. So the point's well taken. So as I noted, to kick us off, and I just want to also underscore a wonderful symmetry, because she was here to help us announce the case against the Sacklers. When we added them to the litigation, they are part of the overall settlement framework that gets us to over $500 million. Please give a warm welcome to Commissioner Buxton-Andrade.